So here is another good question for you. You know who didn't receive the teachings of social justice in grade school? Older generations. I wonder how that affects their ideology. Could it be that they're more inclined to judge people by their history or character rather than their demographic or immutable privilege? It's an open question. Leave me a comment below with your thoughts and observations on this, but I will continue and talk a little bit about it as well. So, our parents, the boomers, they may be called. I'm 35 years old. My parents are boomers. And Generation X, this may apply to you as well. If you're watching, thank you for watching. But we didn't have this level of third wave, fourth wave feminism, the modern religion known as social justice. We have now in the schools, we have more and more intersectionality, what is sometimes referred to as cultural or social Marxism, and in the political context, it's called identity politics or IDPOL. This sort of collectivist, group-minded frame or filter on reality, which separates people into the groups they're a part of and the associations they have, and tends to judge them and try to move them around from there in a postmodern system. So our older generations didn't get this social justice. And this is, by the way, capital letters, S-J, social justice, not the lowercase social justice, which is a generally good, positive thing to bring into our world. What we have when you talk of positive liberty, that's social justice. And I am a proponent of lowercase social justice, but I am also agnostic on the modern religion that is known as social justice. And that is your, cultural Marxism, your intersectionality, putting people into groups. So older generations, yes, they are of course conscious of immutable characteristics such as ethnicity / race, skin tone, sex, things like your gender, and then they're also cognizant of mutable characteristics such as religion, hobbies, occupation, and anything they can change. Those are mutable. Immutable, we're born with, we're stuck with. Either you have these features in your body or you don't. So I do know that we've never lived in a post-racial or post-sexual world. We always have to just work with what we got. We are all different, and I believe that diversity is a strength. And I like to judge people on their character, their merits and their flaws, what they bring to the table, and not so much their ideology, their associations, or their immutable characteristics, because you can't really judge somebody on something that they never had a chance to change. There's no merit to be had in having one skin tone or one sexuality or another. It's just is what it is. If you're a member of the LGBTQ AI plus community, these characteristics are immutable. You're born with them. Or in some cases, people come to them through nurture over nature, but ultimately it doesn't really matter if it's technically nurture or nature. It does kind of come down to how you feel. And of course, I'm totally cool with how everyone feels. I just tend to get a little bit of friction when we talk about lawmaking. When lawmaking comes into play, you do have to make some considerations and make sure you don't get into multi-legalism or other considerations. So, who didn't receive the teachings of social justice from the social justice disciples and prophets of the modern religion? Who didn't get them in grade school? Older generations. How does that affect their ideology? Well, could it be that they're more inclined to judge people by their history or character rather than their demographic or immutable privilege? I don't remember, privilege is an interesting topic. I don't remember privilege ever being brought up when I was younger. Many years ago in high school, and I'm actually a millennial. I was 16 years old in 2000, and I never heard much about privilege. And privilege is an interesting concept because it is very relative. It is very subjective. One person's privilege is another person's. They look at it as a right. We are what we get used to. What we have is confirmation bias. What has been ingrained, sent through our neural pathways, the kind of things that have regulated our dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and cortisol, and helped us, interact with our world and recognize the patterns as they were. There was a different level of engineering back then. We didn't have so many people injecting these topics into school courses. It was a different world. We had certain things like, well, you want to be a friendly neighbor. We've had Mr. Rogers. We've had Barney the dinosaur saying, sharing is caring. We should be a little bit more sharing, which in some people will say that is a dog whistle to collectivism, Marxism, socialism, communism. I wouldn't go that far. Necessarily. I think it's good to be loving and caring and sharing, as long as you're not overriding your own self-love to get there. You might call that a little bit, narcissistic or self-serving, but I feel like it's important to make sure you love yourself first. Like Jordan Peterson says, clean your home first and then worry about the homes of other people, in a nutshell. I think it's important to have self-actualization before we try to map out and define how other people should run their lives. But that's my opinion. And of course, if you disagree, please do leave me a comment below. But I do think that at a certain point you get to an age where you judge people based on what they've done. You go by meritocracy. You look at the pluses and the minuses, where they could have improved, and how they handle feedback. I have a friend, Ruben Gallo, shout out to Ruben Gallo on Twitter, who had retweeted me and made a lovely thread regarding one of my new tweets called Child World. And Ruben Gallo was talking about how it's not so much about the disagreement between people. Like, we have wedges between all of us. There is a reason why identity politics and social justice are such compelling ideologies. But at the end of the day, he said it's about how you address those differences and how you come to a consensus or an agreement, or you agree to disagree, however you do it. But if you do that in a very adult way, you stay away from child view and viewing people by base labels and characteristics, like we talk about immutable and mutables. So right now, children are growing up in schools and being told things like, there are certain groups that are the oppressor, and there are certain groups that are the oppressed. And they don't get into the context. Context counts. Remember that, kids? Context counts. They don't get into the context of what's going on. They just say, well, this is the way it is. This is how we'd like you to view reality. This is the filter we'd like you to put. And what we're seeing more and more, and it's turning into teenagers and adults that go around. I wish I were a little bit more sympathetic to this idea, but I don't want to live in an identitarian country. Okay, so I don't like the idea of filtering people by race, sex, religion, or any of these things, mutable or immutable. But you're seeing that more and more. You're seeing a narrative form. Again, we talk about postmodernism and post-truth. We see a narrative form where things are selectively put in front of children, the most impressionable people out there. They're being put in front of grade school kids, and they don't know. They don't know if it's true or false. Just like if you're watching this video, I always say everything I say today might be wrong or right. They don't know. They're going by the trust they have in the adults, the ones that should know. In their mind, they're making a judgment call. Can't mind read, but the children say, they're the adults. I want to rebel, but ultimately I know at the end of the day I have this intuition that they know it's right. They run the show. They're big, they're smart, and they just trust it and go along with it. And over time, if they have been conditioned to see the world through a certain filter or a set of filters, some may call it a modern religion of moral code of what is true, what is false, what is universal truth, and how do we map it for others, depending on which modern religion you're talking about. But children are getting all these messages. They're receiving it through their media as well. They're receiving messages that may be positive in intent, but ultimately, again, we have this thing called altruistic otherism. If you're looking at people and looking at them as a stereotype or how they've been described by the media that you intake, that changes everything. And it's just a matter of if the parents, it's really the parents' choice, if the parents wished for their child to grow up with this ideology. So that's why you see with the Christian question, in terms of prayer in schools, and we talk about Muslims, you have can you wear a hijab in school, and all this stuff, this religious freedom that we enjoy in the United States of America. But they ask this question because they say, well, other kids are seeing it, are they influenced? And ultimately it is the parents' responsibility and discretion to choose what their child intakes. It's a complicated system that some people, over time, they don't know how much agency does the child have and how much agency does the parent have. But at the end of the day, a lot of our children are being trained to judge people by their immutable characteristics, which I go over in a tweet called Generating Racism. Check it out in a video as well. So I do feel that older people, yes, there are a number of older people that are otherists. They are racists. They are sexists. And that could be a product of culture. Well, it is a product of culture in many ways. Like, we are products of culture. The people that we grow up around, our parents. There are some biological processes that help us to view things in a different way. Some people, I don't want to name certain neurodivergent groups and things like that, but we do have, everybody, all 7+ billion of us do have our own perspective on the greater world, the more objective reality that we're seeing in front of us. But we do have our subjective filters, some rational, some irrational. And I feel like, yes, the social justice question in isolation, this is the conversation we're having, you're not seeing that so much. You're not seeing so many social justice warriors or social justice disciples of that modern religion in the older age groups. It's kind of a young man's and young woman's game. So, but I do want to ask you, the audience, what you think of that question, and I look forward to hearing some feedback.